Alrighty, so here's what I've been up to so far. In the first episode, I showed off the solid AXLE HILUX I brought, and then asked you guys for some input into what to do with it. Then in the second episode, we took the little ute out to some basic tracks and put it up against my highly modified LM106 Hilux. And we found that little ute's limits. Again. And again. Yeah! And again. All until, thanks to this bloke, it finally gave up and lost drive to the front wheels after snapping the drive shaft on a big ass log.
Look at that, thin.
Nothing to it, eh?
Just paper.
Nothing to it.
That cereal box is thicker than that.
But now in this episode, I start to turn this stock old Hilux into a capable off-road weapon with a budget that's realistic and also modifications that are totally possible in your garage at home. And with a bit of luck, we might even get this little ute to complete a track this time. Alright, now this is the episode I'm most excited about. It's finally time to de-grandpa spec this Hilux and turn it into a real four-wheel drive. That means ditching all the unnecessary things like the weather shields, the fuzzy dash mat, the racing steering wheel cover that definitely didn't add any horsepower, the old man side steps that didn't agree with the first 30 seconds of my off-road driving, the under-tray toolboxes, and unfortunately the absolute beauty of a bull bar this ute came with. And trust me, I thought of keeping it on for a bit of a laugh, but I just couldn't do it. So, how good's this? It's actually starting to look like a four-wheel drive again now, and as you can probably see, got some decent rubber for it too. I don't know about you, but that is just so much better than what it was an hour ago. So what I've got on here at the moment, it's a 15-inch rim. It's a neg 22 offset. The tyres are 33, 12.5 15s. So the biggest thing with anything over 33s, or even some 33s, this part of the tyre here will rub up in the guard quite a fair bit. Especially at full lock too, because when the tyre swings, this corner actually gets closer to the guard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move the axle further forward to give it more clearance, and this section up here can easily be trimmed. I will put a bull bar on it eventually, but for now I'm just going to hack that up, I reckon. But before I go into any sort of suspension mods, what I want to do is I actually want to take this thing around to a forklift, flex it up, take some measurements and see what sort of a difference it's going to make doing some suspension mods to this thing. So I've managed to find myself an old Nissan Patrol, forklift, and what we're going to do is get this ute up on it and flex it out. It's not going to be anything spectacular, but let's find out what it does. So what have we got here? Roughly 42 centimeters of vertical lift, so nearly as much as your grandma's Hyundai, and absolutely nowhere near as much as what I got out of the LM106, but this is the starting point. It's only improvement from here. All right, well that's the rear done. Let's go see what the front has to offer. About 39 centimeters, so still a lot of room for improvement. You can definitely see where the saying leaf springs don't flex comes from, but I reckon by the end of this, we'll have this old junker out flexing most coil cabs. Alright, so I thought I'd come out to these little hills here and muck around in the ute a bit. With the ute the way it is, just a set of 33s on it, with no work at all from my part on the suspension, and show you guys how it handles them. So the biggest issue is not just how the ute rides, because with the way it is at the moment, it is ridiculously rough off-road. And very, very little wheel travel by the front or the rear. As you can probably hear, tyres are scrubbing and making all sorts of funny noises under the guards. So there's definitely some work to be done. So what I'm going to do when I get back, I'm going to show you guys how to clear up to a 35-inch tyre on these solid axle utes and make the ride a heap more comfortable without spending a huge amount of money or having to bust out the welder just yet. All right, well let's get out of here. Lucky the ute's got aircon. It's a bloody hot day. So what I'm about to show you is probably the best bang for buck suspension setups you can do for these old leafy Hiluxes, in my opinion anyway. There's no major modification, it's all just bolt in. So something you can do in a weekend, and it's not overly expensive either. So unfortunately in Australia though, there is lots of laws in regards to vehicle modification, so just check what's legal in your state before you start unbolting things and modifying your four-wheel drives. There are, luckily, over here, a lot of good aftermarket kits you can just bolt in and be nice and 100% legal. So the rear end's up first, and what I'll be doing is called IFS rears. It's the quickest way to gain comfort and a bit of flex from the lazy rear suspension. So what you're going to need is a set of 200mm shackles. I got these from Shire's Fabrication. A tail shaft spacer, 25mm seems to work fine. Extended brake lines, I got all my brake lines locally made. Leaf spring front eye bushers. There's a few options, but I'm going to use these, and they're from a Holden Rodeo. And a set of rear leaf springs from an N60 Hilux. So that's the IFS one with the torsion bar front end, from around about 97 to 05. So funny story with these leaves, these are actually the original leaves that I put in my LM106 when I done the IFS rears on that. Then I sold them to a mate, who then sold them to another mate, who then I've bought them back off them again. Since I've owned them, they've reset them in the press once again to get a nice big arc to them. And they've added 2 extra leaves because the bloke who owned them previous to me had a big heavy steel tray and did a Fraser trip all loaded up, so they added some load leaves to it to carry some weight for the trip. I'll be taking them back out because obviously this ute's got a really light aluminium tray on it for now, so I'm going to make this pack as light as I can and ditch all the unnecessary leaves to get it flexing like it should. So it's not super necessary to reset your leaves in the press. You can get them, the rear ends of these Hiluxes riding a lot better just by installing a standard set. However, just by getting a nice big arc in them allows the diff to drop down into the holes as you drive over it, giving you a little bit more drop travel. Cool, so first up, I'm going to get this ute in the air and we'll get the wheels off. So now that the wheels are off, all that we're really going to do is just pull out this old leaf pack. So undoing the front bolts, U-bolts of course, flick the handbrake cable out of the way, drop the shock out and take off your shackles completely. That way, all we're left is this with the diff housing floating there on its own, and we'll throw in these new leaves. So I've just got the jack stands underneath the chassis of the ute, so all the weight is on those jack stands. Also got one here back just for safety, just in case. Got the diff supported just by another jack there so I can raise and lower it to get everything lined up. And now I'm ready to take these U-bolts out. These main U-bolts are just so seized. I doubt they've been off for a ridiculous amount of time. So to save me swinging off them for the next 2 hours, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run an angle grinder straight through them. Here's a bit of a comparison of the standard leaves which are at the top versus the IFS leaves that are down the bottom. Eye to eyes are lined up on this side here. You'll notice that the pin is further back on the IFS leaves, so we're actually moving the axle of the ute further backwards. The main difference is the tail end of the leaf pack here. As you'll notice, there's quite a bit of a difference between where the rear leaf spring eye ends, and you can see by fitting the longer shackle we get a nice big angle on it, which allows nice comfy ride with a bit more down travel. So the reason I needed to get new bushings for the front of the leaf spring is because on the IFS versions the ring is actually larger than the standard, so we can't actually reuse this original bush in the front. We have to get new bushes. The rear, however, the bushes are compatible. I'm just going to pull that bush out of there, chuck it in the rear, and that'll work fine with the aftermarket shackles. So I'm now playing with the leaf pack that I'm going to put in this ute. This is the IFS pack. I've split the pack open just by taking out this centre bolt that goes in the middle. I'm going to remove the lower leaf because it's absolutely mega, and I'm also going to remove this little leaf here from the top, and that should give me a nice soft leaf pack for an aluminium tray for now. When I do eventually build a tray for this, it'll be steel, more than likely. I'll throw this one back in, but for now I reckon just a nice light 4 leaves will do the trick just fine. So that's an IFS rear leaf fitted. What you can see, what I'll show you, is where the centre pin is versus where it used to be. So centre pin hole is about here. You can see it's actually pushing the diff a little bit further back, and that's sort of why it's so important to have to run the tail shaft spacer, which can either go on the diff side or up near the centre bearing. I prefer to put them up at the centre bearing just because less chance of smacking on rocks then. So managed to get some flash new U-bolts for the little Luxie. Jeez, won't know itself now. So all I'm going to have to do now is basically trim up these U-bolts. So they're pretty generic ones, so they're just like mega long, so I'll cut them pretty much flush. So I've cut all the U-bolts down so they're pretty much flush with the bottom shock bracket. However, I've left a little bit of thread on them just in case I wanted to add another leaf later on. Beauty, so those rear shackles are in, IFS rear leaves are in, new U-bolts are in, we've got the bushes in the front installed. All that's left to do now is just replace this brake line as well as fit the tail shaft spacer. Well, there you go, that's basically what you call IFS rears. So it's just changing over that main leaf pack, chucking into bigger shackles, set of U-bolts if you need them, tail shaft spacer and some brake lines, and away you go with heaps better flex and a lot more comfort. It's under its own weight now, it's sitting pretty good. String's got a nice little arc in it, so looks good. Happy with that height actually. We'll see what it's like after a few little runs and see if it lowers itself down a little bit and wears in, but yeah, very happy with that. So another pretty common modification for the rear of these Luxies is to invert the rear shocks to get a bit more travel out of it. I'm just going to leave the rear how it is for now, because I've got a spicy little plan that I might try later on. So the front of these utes, honestly, it's really easy to get them flexing well. I think mainly it's to do with the weight balance of the utes. There's just a heap more weight at the front than there is the rear. So the rears are quite hard to get working properly, but the front ends, you can get them flexing really good. So what we're going to do is a mod called rears up front. As the name implies, I'm basically just going to move the rear leaf springs and put them up the front. So for the front end, we're going to need a pair of banana shackles. I got these ones here from Shire's Fabrication. Also going to need an extended pair of front brake lines. I got these ones locally made, just like the rears. An adjustable torque rod. You don't actually need one of these, you can modify your own. However, I just prefer to buy one, that way I know it's going to work. A 35mm shorter drop drag link. I got this one here from Superior Engineering. However, I'll still need to trim it to get it to fit. A custom long slip front drive shaft. I got this one made by Shire's Fabrication as well. And they also opted for a brand new set of U-bolts to the front again, just to make my life easier. So it's basically the same as what we're doing in the rear. Just going to be swapping out the leaf springs for longer ones. So we're going to use the rear leaf springs that I pulled out earlier. The only real difference is I've got steering to worry about now. The idea is to get the front end of the ute as high as you can off the ground. That way I've got some room to drop the diff down and get these new springs in, as well as the big shackles. So let's get it airborne. Alrighty, so we're back on jack stands again. Got the ute nice and high, enough room so I can get a jack underneath this front diff so I can raise and lower it if I need to. First up, I'm just going to take off this drag link as well as the torque rod, get those steering components out of the way. Once those steering parts are out of the way, there's really not that much that holds these front ends together. Front tail shaft has already been removed, thanks Kyle. So now the next thing I'm going to do is get rid of these brake lines so they're not in the way. Alright, so now that everything's out of the way, all that really connects the diff to the car is the leaf springs and the shocks. I'm going to leave the shocks in place and start cutting off these U-bolts so I can make way for these new leaf springs. Well, you got to have a win every now and then. Those U-bolts actually came undone with the rattle gun, which is sick. Didn't have to cut them off with the grinder. Next up, you can undo the front bolts here and undo it at the shackle. Get these leaves out of the way. Worth mentioning this, so if you've ever heard the term diff push, I'll explain basically what's going on. So with the diff push you can use your factory front leads, and what you're going to do is basically you're just going to transfer the centre pin from this hole to here, which will push the diff about 35mm further forward. This side is easy, the other side all you have to do is drill out the leaf spring perch, and all you're going to do on the driver's side is basically just measure 35mm from this hole back, drill through here, and that'll be your new leaf spring centre bolt position, which will then be the easiest way to shift your whole axle 35mm further forward, which gives you a little bit more clearance up in the guard here to fit larger tyres. Sometimes you can get away with just fitting a tail shaft spacer if you just do it that way. Steering you'll still have to shorten, obviously because everything comes further forward, but you still won't get as much wheel travel as what I'm about to show you. So the main difference with what I'm doing is shackle length. You can see the banana shackles are quite a bit longer than the standard shackles, which will give it a bit more of a swing, just like what we did with the rear. So I've just stacked the old front leaf spring on top of the rear leaf spring and lined up the eyes so they're basically in line. with this setup, we're swapping this out, we're probably getting around about 55 mil of diff push, so moving that front axle quite a fair ways forward. And you can see at the back here, there's not a huge amount of length difference, but it's still necessary to run banana shackles, so when the shackle swings, you can actually clear these body mounts here without fouling on them. Sometimes at this stage, I'll actually reset the front leaf springs in the press to get a bit more of an arc out of them, but I'm happy with the way these are sitting. They've got a bit more of an arc than the ones that I've originally pulled out, so I think for now, they'll do just fine. So this ute here is going to be significantly lighter than my LM106. It's got no front bar, it's got no sliders, only got one battery, lighter petrol motor, alloy tray, you know, it's quite a light vehicle compared to the LM106. So this is the LM106 that I've got. It's quite a heavy vehicle. It's got full bar work all around it and the heavy diesel motor. It's running 5 leaf springs in the front with a heavy sort of lower override spring down the bottom. So I'm thinking for the RN, I'm just going to chuck in 4 for now and see how it sits. So what I'm thinking for now is I'm going to keep the top 4, leave them in here because they're wrapped as well. Should keep the pack all together, and I'll ditch these lower 3. Eventually, if I put bar work like a bull bar, rock sliders, dual batteries, you know, a different heavier motor or whatever I'm going to do down the track, I'll run this leaf in here. That way it's got an extra wrap. I can put a hole a bit closer to keep the pack together so it doesn't do weird things, and that should help support a bit more weight. But for now, I can keep this pack nice and light to get it flexing and riding nice and comfy. So that's what the leaf spring looks like with just the 4 leaves in it. To be honest, first glance it looks pretty light, but then again this ute is pretty light, so I'll chuck it in, see how it sits. The good thing is though, I'll show you this. So being an avid Hilux leaf spring enthusiast, I have my own very beautiful collection of leaf springs here, so I can always mess around and try and find the right one with all different lengths and shapes and sizes, and some have brackets on them and things, but most of them I can reset in the press and get them to the angle I need. So if I need to raise and lower it or add some more leaves, so I'll get them fitted, chuck the shackles in and see how it sits under its own weight before I start mucking around with the steering. So that way if I need to change anything, the steering's not in the way and I can just haul these leaf springs back out to add or remove leaves. So to make my life easier, I've just taken the lower bolt out of the shock so I can control the height of the diff with the jack. So leaf springs are in, shackles are fitted, so I'm at the stage now where I've got to drag the front diff forward, line it up with these bolts, and whack some new bolts on it. So I'm just going to cut off the extra threads of these U-bolts. I've only have to do it on one side because the driver's side is actually pretty bang on. If I needed to add another leaf, at least I've got enough thread to play with. So the springs are in, shackles are in, and the diff's all bolted up again. Before I go chucking steering and all those components back together, I'm just going to put the wheels back on it, get the ute resting under its own weight, and we'll see if I need to add or remove any leaves out of it. Well, I'm actually pretty happy with the way that sits for a first go without mucking around too much with the leaf pack. You can see the front really, I think it might have gained a little bit of height, but overall it's sitting pretty flat now with those rear leaves. So now that I've added the extended shackle on the rear, the leaf spring is actually tilted slightly downward towards the back of the car, which then in turn actually pivots the whole axle slightly backwards, which affects your caster. You can get these little wedges that fit between your diff perch and your leaf spring. These little things here called caster wedges. I've seen them sold from anywhere between 1 degree to 4 degrees. Basically it's just a little metal wedge that, yeah, fits in between there, and it'll correct your caster. Actually, it'll go in that way to help bring the front down a little bit to counteract the extended shackles at the back. It'll just help the car steer nicer on the road. I'm not going to run them in this ute because mainly it's going to be used off-road, but just a tip, if you want to drive it nice again, these could be an option for you. The only risk is the little bolt that goes through your leaf spring doesn't have as much engagement in the diff. There's a chance of it popping out. Obviously the thicker the wedge, the more chance of that happening, so little thing to keep in the back of your mind if you're going to fit these. So I'm just about to go throw in the new adjustable torque rod. Some people actually leave these out completely, but if you do and you're on the highway and you try and brake in a hurry, it'll actually spit your car into the guardrail. So good idea, keep one of these things in it. Unless you're using the vehicle for purely off-road use, you could probably leave it out, get a little bit more flex on the driver's side, especially droop, because this will hold it up a bit. But as a safety point of view, if you're using it on the road, fit one. Unless of course you're going to high steer, where you can go throw this in the bin and throw the whole J-arm push-pull steering in the bin as well, and you'll get a much better setup. But for now, not spending too much money on this old girl, so we'll keep it pretty simple. Just make sure too, when you're doing up the lower and the upper eye bolts for this torque rod, that the car's weight is on the diff. That way the suspension's at ride height, so you don't tear the bushes when you lower it back down again. So I'm up to the stage now fitting this new drag link on it. I've centered the pitman arm so the steering wheel is centered and it's facing forwards. I've also centered the steering down here as well, so everything should be all pointing straight. This is the new arm I'm going to be fitting. However, it's still roughly about 30mm too long, so I'm going to trim it down, take about 15mm off each end, shorten it up, and then away we go. So I've just taken off roughly 15mm of each end of the new drag link. I've also shortened 15mm of these drag link ends so they can fit in this section that is now shorter. And make sure you grease everything too, because future you will definitely thank you. So sometimes getting a drag length that's going to suit is a bit tricky. So people with a lot heavier of a ute, they're going to have to run a lot more leaves than what I am. So this leaf pack's going to be naturally taller, and this arm here is going to get closer to these U-bolts, and sometimes they will actually foul at full lock or full droop or under certain situations. So one thing to be mindful of with thick packs, this clearance here becomes very tight. You can get a little bit more clearance back by fitting some flat U-bolts, not these standard round ones. You can gain a little bit of clearance there. Other people have to fit a straight arm, but they don't work as well with big long shocks, so it's a bit of an odd one, but for this setup that works perfect, and I've got ample clearance, so I'm happy. So now all the steering components are in, we're going to move on to getting some shocks in this ute. There is a fair few options out there, however running these stock shock towers does restrict you a fair bit because there isn't a huge amount of room to play with. But one option is Commodore shocks. They're cheap, they're nasty. They're definitely not a good shock by any means, but they do the job if you're chasing flex. I wouldn't use them for beach runs or long distance touring because they are a little bit long for this setup, so more than likely this ute's going to bottom out on its shock, not the bump stop, unless I space it probably 20-30mm, but it gives you a lot of good droop, and for the tracks that I want to take it up, it'll be sort of slow crawling anyway, so flex is what we're after, and this is cheap flex. Don't judge. So here's the shocks that come out of it versus the Commodore shocks in comparison. You can see the Commodore shocks are much longer, but they're a skinny little bore, so for off-roading they're not really the best idea, but they're cheap and they work. The Commodore shock is the equivalent of a 10.5-inch travel shock, so it's 635mm open and 365mm closed there around abouts. The closed part is the issue. Realistically, I think I measured it to be around about 330 to 335 before it hits bump stop on this ute, so I've got about 30mm of shock bump before it actually hits the bump stops. All I have to do later is fit a set of 80 series bump stops later on down the track to allow it to bottom out on the bump stop and not the shock. this bush is actually too small in diameter for the bolt to go through. So two options: you can either press out the bush of your new shocks, fit your old ones into it, that's an option, or you can get a grinder and just lop the edges off it, get a drill and drill out the crush tube a little bit in the middle there to get it to fit. So I've just chosen the easy option. I'm just going to drill the crush tube out, grind down the ends a little bit and get it to fit. So now that the shocks are in, I'm just going to get straight into installing these new brake lines. So I'm up to the stage now where I'm going to fit this long slip drive shaft. So there's plenty of different options that I've seen people run. I've seen box shafts, I've seen PTOs, I've seen long slip splines. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. Obviously getting a professionally built shaft is going to be quite expensive, but at least it'll be balanced. You can do beach runs, high speed, without vibrations. PTOs are your next step down from that again. They're designed for tractors, which is exactly what I've got right behind me. Or even more agricultural than that is you can get like a 50mm box shaft. I've seen a lot of people use those. They're cheap, you can make them yourself. They're not balanced, they make a lot of noise, but they do the job. So they're your three main options. Some people I've seen try to run the factory shaft or get a V6 surf shaft, which is longer. However, the splines, the usable splines in it, just aren't long enough. So it will pop out on full flex with this setup. So you have to get a shaft made that's longer to suit. Well, there you go. That's basically what you call IFS rears and rears up front. I'm just going to do a quick nut and bolt check over the front and rear now, make sure everything's nice and tight. I'll finish off bleeding the brakes and then I think it's about time to flex this thing up and see how good it is off-road. So after checking over the ute and then attacking the bumper with a grinder for a bit more clearance, we're good to go. Cool, well there you go, that's made a decent improvement to wheel travel front and rear, as well as making it a heap more comfortable to drive around in. So after all that suspension work, I've been able to lift the forklift tines an extra 140mm off the ground at the front of the vehicle and another 280mm at the rear. Not bad for a weekend's worth of work. Also, check out the front end. We've got a massive amount of clearance under the front here for these little 33s and ample room to fit 35s later on down the track. Oh, I think it's about time to go see how this thing handles the track. So look, don't get me wrong, we're not driving on coils here, but it is so much smoother than what it was originally. Like just having the ability to drive over bumps without getting thrown around the cab and then sort of like having to correct your steering all the time is wicked. You can just feel the wheels going up and down the way they should over bumps. It's not bucking the cab sort of sideways every time I hit any little bump. It's just sort of gliding over things a heap better than what it was before. Try and make it as hard as we can. Oh, a little weapon! Look at that! Eats it up! Awesome! So this is a pretty basic little hill, which should give us a bit of an idea of how much better this thing performs off-road. Oh, it's greasy! On you good thing. There you go, find the traction, up she goes. What a weapon! How good's that? So this track here I'm genuinely unsure about because it's a little bit spicy and it's a bit wet and we got no lockers, but we got a little bit of flex and some decent sized tyres, so we'll see. See this little Luxie can get this bonus line up here. It's a good little challenging section of track, this one. I quite enjoy driving this in the LN, but it just walks it. It's quite easy. Doing all right so far. Ooh, bit bouncy there. Things are getting worse there. That's not working. Let's try again. Come on. Oh, look at that. Done it again. How good. That is sick. That is so much fun. How good are basic four drives? They just make average tracks so much more fun. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the flex on it. The rear, unfortunately, is still held up by these shocks. They definitely could be a bit longer, or I could invert them, put them on a bit of an angle to get a bit more travel out of it, but you start to lose the performance of the shock once you start to tip the tops of them in, and they start to bounce around and ride funny. So I'm going to keep them upright for now in their stock location and just drive it the way it is. And in the future, I'll have a bit of a play around and see if I can get a bit more travel out of some bigger shocks later on. Well, I've genuinely had a lot of fun in this ute today. It's good getting back to basics and driving a ute that's completely unlocked, and just sort of having to pick a line and work your way up hills. It's good fun actually. And with this decent amount of suspension travel now, it's pretty capable for an unlocked ute. Keen to push it a little bit harder in some future videos and see where I can end up taking it. So I genuinely hope that this has helped a few people out there get a bit of an idea of what they can do with their Hiluxes to get a bit more wheel travel out of them, to make them a little bit more comfortable and whatnot. Well, I'm going to put the cameras down now and stop filming and get in this ute and get to know it a little bit better and go wheel some tracks.